This presentation will look at the benefits of failing in the context of the design process. When prototyping and iteration are at the heart of what you do, adjusting to the reality that you will come up with a lot of wrong answers, or at least a lot of answers that could be a whole lot better, is a reality of your work life. But some people have a hard time adjusting to that, and those who see the value in trying without the certainty of success even struggle sometimes to make the most of the learning opportunities that failure presents. Here, I will talk to you about the role of failure in general and give you some interesting examples of how failure has played a positive role in the design practices of others. Let's start with some general definitions. Failure is misunderstood, probably because it's often equated with losing. But it's really just a lack of success. Most business leaders, scientists, and engineers agree that there is much to be learned from failure. But people in creative fields need to be reminded of that because when the questions you address through your work are open-ended, it's not always so evident when failure has occurred. Also, it's not always clear about why failures occur. So designers must be really aware and reflective about what is actually happening when it seems like their work has not met its full potential. One of the best ways to avoid missing opportunities to learn from failure is to change the way you look at it in the first place. Amy Edmondson, in writing for the Harvard Business Review, reminds us about how reframing failure can be a move in the right direction. The first step is to change the way you think about failure in the first place. Become someone who believes that failure is not always bad. Sometimes it is bad, but sometimes it's inevitable, and sometimes it's even good. Secondly, even if you're willing to see failure in a new way, you need to learn how to learn from failure. The attitudes and activities required to effectively detect and analyze failures are not techniques we are encouraged to adopt as children. So most of us need new and better ways to go beyond lessons that are superficial, like procedures weren't followed, or self-serving, like the market just wasn't ready for our great new product. That means you have to let go of long-held cultural beliefs and stereotypical notions about the value of success and learn to embrace failure's lessons. One of the best ways to do this is to make sure that blame is never in the way. In the public realm, it's hard to learn from failure without assigning blame, because to not do so suggests an anything-goes attitude. Edmondson also reminds us that this concern is based on a false dichotomy. In actuality, she says, a culture that makes it safe to admit and report on failure can, and in some organizational contexts must, coexist with high standards for performance. Failure is only possible when conditions like deliberate deviation, thoughtful experimentation, and exploratory testing are enabled. When something goes wrong, it's important to try to understand the conditions that led up to that occurrence. In design, that could be a process-related problem, such as not allowing enough time for adequate fabrication, or it could be a wrong decision resulting in pursuing a solution that does not address the correct problem. Things like that don't happen without reasons, and diagnostic thinking encourages you to pursue understanding those causes. Was insufficient time given to a project because of poor time management? Or was the process chosen for fabrication unrealistic due to the time it requires? Or did more time need to be provided so that this particular fabrication process could be maximized? In other words, is an extension warranted? In the case of creating a solution that misses the mark, the diagnosis might be best steered toward an examination of the research process. Perhaps too few stakeholders were consulted. Perhaps not enough resources were directed toward the project. Or maybe you're either ahead of or behind your time. Amy Edmondson also tells us that although serious failures in business can often be avoided by following best practices for safety and risk management, small process failures are inevitable within the context of complex systems. The ability to rapidly identify and correct small failures is an important skill to cultivate. In medicine, most accidents in hospitals result from a series of small failures that went unnoticed and unfortunately lined up in just the wrong way. So this is where iteration becomes essential, because each test or attempt to mock up a solution provides an opportunity to anticipate the small failures that may be created. If these can be addressed in subsequent iterations of possibilities, the design solutions you produce are more likely to be successful. The graphic on this screen is meant to be an example of the ways that small problems can add up to big ones if not identified and addressed right away. When designers are presented with opportunities to test their ideas, they're encouraged to do so in environments that replicate actual conditions. This may mean working with a focus group to try out an app, or building a mock-up or appearance model so that it can be understood by users as the real thing. Or it may mean creating multiple prototypes with slight variances that can be used to reveal how a design idea will survive when it is applied in different circumstances. Just like scientists in a laboratory, it's not possible to know if a design will succeed or fail when it is produced if it's not tested under circumstances that mimic or replicate the anticipated conditions. Sometimes it's tempting to skip this step to save time in the iterative process. But just as what works in Copenhagen is not likely to be the right solution everywhere in the world, and we know that. While business managers are often encouraged to color code their reports to identify which ones need more attention than others, designers are often encouraged to use graphic means and coding, such as color, to make visual cues that guide their attention to the points in their process that need most. In user experience design, this might be equated with the identification of pain points, places in a process where conditions are not optimized. In this graphic representation of a design idea, the color red and circled elements, along with correlating emojis, all highlight a point in this process that will require additional iterations to ensure that the customer's pain, or at least the customer's inconvenience, can be minimized, or better still, eliminated. The less formal diagram on the whiteboard, using colored Post-it notes, illustrates a quick and more flexible way to articulate the critical examination of a process that still has some areas of potential failure that could use more attention. One of the key ways that designers make the most of what failure has to offer to the process of producing innovative and successful ideas is the use of critique or critical conversation throughout their process, and even when a design project is completed. Putting ideas under a microscope, so to speak, to identify their strengths and weaknesses, no matter how successful they are, is an inherent part of the design thinking. Learning from and reflecting about how every experience is an opportunity to learn what to do and what not to do for future reference is what makes experienced designers able to integrate what might seem like intuition into their practices. Most of the time, how to approach a design problem is not the result of some sort of innate natural ability to see and know what to do. It's the culmination of learned best practices that can sometimes inspire new innovative ways to approach problems in ways that are both fresh and likely to be successful. So don't hold back or avoid opportunities to engage in these kinds of discussions. If you research failure in design, the products listed on the screen were all discovered when something that was supposed to happen didn't. So that's another important point in this discussion. Are failures always failures? Or are they sometimes also unanticipated opportunities? When Wilson Greatbatch accidentally assembled the wrong set of parts, creating an electrical circuit that emitted a regularly beating rhythm similar to a heartbeat, he inadvertently created a device that has saved up to 500,000 human lives per year, even though the thing he was trying to make technically did not come to fruition. Spencer Silver's invention of a weak glue for the 3M company led to the development of a less life-saving but more prevalent product, the Post-it note. Small pieces of paper that can reliably stick to other things, like other papers, and be removed without damaging the surface to which they were attached. Post-it notes began to be produced in 1980, 10 years after Silver made his discovery. It took the insight of a company employee from another department to actually see the potential for this weak adhesive before the actual product came to be. This is also, then, an argument for bringing people with different backgrounds and different areas of expertise together in design to maximize the chance that innovation will occur. Finally, let's look at a famous recent example of a design that failed and what can be learned from that story. You may remember Google Glass, the revolutionary product that never quite made it to the market in any kind of impactful way. Google Glass usually comes up in conversations about design failure, but the jury is still out on whether or not the company that developed the wearable interface was ahead of or behind the times. The reasons for its demise are usually cited as, first, concerns about health; second, the look of the product; third, the lack of clarity of its function; and fourth, an inadequate marketing plan. Not everyone was comfortable with the idea of having a gadget that constantly emits carcinogenic radiation so close to the head, it seems. And even if they were, the product looked more like a prototype than an actual completed and refined idea. Although the product did allow for access to information in a new kind of way, consumers seemed less convinced that it performed a function that they actually needed. And of course, with a very high price tag of $1,500, those same consumers had the right to expect smooth performance every time. Added problems, like concerns about distraction for drivers wearing the headsets and potential for compromise to privacy and security, contributed to its demise on the consumer market. So, from the experience of the development and failure of Google Glass, several lessons can be learned. First, it's critical to do enough and the right kind of research with stakeholders. And if there is even the inkling that a product is detrimental to human health, you'd better resolve that perception and that reality in a conclusive way. And because you are essentially asking people to augment their face with your product, giving serious consideration to how well it complements human features must also be a priority. And certainly, if widespread adoption is the intent for products like this, affordability in conjunction with durability needs to be a factor. While Apple's $1,000 iPhone X may be establishing a new baseline for what techie consumers will be willing to spend for their personal devices, Apple's products do have a pretty good record of being workhorses in the long run, even with heavy usage. The immediately beneficial lesson from the failure of Google Glass may be seen in the realm of understanding what it offers. Once Google began to understand the particular advantages that a wearable headset offered to people who need to use their hands for something else, they began to find some extended life for Google Glass, in particular industrial settings and applications. The floor worker on the screen is one of many manufacturing employees in a tractor assembly factory. And in this kind of setting, being able to access and record or report information without using both of one's hands has added tremendous efficiency to their assembly process. Understanding that having the ability to replace the use of tablets that were always in the way and that were frequently dropped and damaged on the manufacturing floor gave the company insight into how to clarify the purpose of the product. While still limited in the scope of its applicability, perhaps added analysis of why the wearable headset seems to be a game changer in this type of setting will reveal future opportunities for Google to try again, and this time to get it right.